and thanks for staying with us here. On the polls, we need to touch on some more issues coming up because the colleges of education are expected to churn out for the very first time the first batch of degree-holding teachers for the very first time in this year. Now, the feat for many experts is the first towards transforming the training of teachers and by extension some reformation taking place at the educational sector in Ghana. Now in 2014, the government of Ghana, having realized that the initial teacher education system in Ghana was not responding effectively to the changes needed to improve the quality of teachers that are trained, and therefore embarked on a number of reforms, including the decision to transform the institutions into a degree awarding one. Now, in spite of the improvement over the years, there are calls that there must be deep-cutting policies that will also tackle the teething challenges of infrastructure and other needs that confront the schools. Well, a lot of push has been made that some changes should range from issues of scrapping the allowances. Joining me now is Dr. Samuel Antonio, who's he's actually Samuel ATINTONO. He's the principal of the Accra Colleges of Education. We also have Larry AGBADOR, who's editor for the Colleges of Education Weekly Journal. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. First of all, let's get a background to the reform that we witnessed in 2014. Larry, there are concerns about how we actually arrived here. What is the journey in terms of transforming the colleges of education from where they used to be into the degree awarding institutions now? Well, just before we get to Larry, Doc, if you can hear me, there's the question about the schools itself, the status of the many colleges of education that we have. There are even fears as of now, as we speak, that there may be shortages in terms of food supply to the schools. What can you, first of all, say about that status in terms of the various colleges, at least speaking from where you manage?
Good afternoon to you and your cherished listeners, and thank you for having us this afternoon to discuss about the state of the colleges this afternoon. I think you asked the question about the reforms, and what happened is in 2018, the colleges were converted to degree 4-year Bachelor of Education degree awarding institutions. And from that point, what it meant is that we're no longer running the diploma program that ended effectively in 2019 or 2020. So with the degree program, we'll have 3 main programs. That's a Bachelor of Education primary option, GHS option, and early grade. So that is what we are now having. Coming back to your question, what's the state of the food in the College of Education? Yes, government still pay the allowances to the students, and then they also provide the feeding grant for the principals to run the colleges. At the moment, I think it's not a bad situation. They are making some release. Of course, there have been some delay, but there's a release coming up, so that can sort of support us.
And that expands the question about the transformation ever since. The concern is that after we did the transformation of the various colleges of education, we have not provided the necessary and adequate resources to improve the conditions on various campuses across the country. What do you feel we can do in terms of changing that narrative?
It is true. First of all, these colleges were established as pre-tertiary institutions, and therefore the infrastructure that existed before the conversion meant that there were some challenges in terms of students, hostels, or residents, which were dormitories, to say, just like the secondary schools had. So we needed to construct new kind of facilities. Of course, also that will also relate to lecture blocks and many other infrastructure that we needed. That hasn't happened. Of course, there have been some modest kind of improvement, but not up to where we would really want it. And the conversation now would be, if you take the colleges of education where government fully support these things, we might want to now look at a situation where can there be a kind of partnership, private government, and which also meant that some fee level or some payment. Take, for example, the accommodation. The student pays about 200 or 300 cedis a year. naturally that cannot be enough to sustain or give them any good accommodation. So it requires that we have to have a national conversation and a dialogue to see how we can support. Of course, there's also get fund allocation, but this allocation is actually based on the number of students that you have across the tertiary institution, thereby disadvantaging the college because our numbers are usually not enough compared to traditional public universities. It will mean the formula will have to be sort of revised and giving priority to the colleges if we have to up the infrastructure to where we actually want them to be.
If you want to list the problems in terms of the challenges confronting the various colleges of education as we speak in contemporary times, where would you ask that the policymakers turn their attention to?
I think where I ended, I would talk about infrastructure. I've also talked about financing, which is actually one of the key things that we are going to discuss in the dialogue tomorrow. Of course, in infrastructure-wise, I'm talking about hostel facilities, lecture blocks, science laboratories. I'm afraid in all the colleges are having serious challenges. They need to be up. I meant science and even ICT. So you need all these things to be in place in order to be able to conduct effective teaching and learning.
So what you mean to say now is that persons who are, for instance, training our various, pupils in all the public schools across the country, for instance, do not have access to proper computer labs. So how then are they able to even train those in the basic schools?
Well, we have some, but there are very few. For example, if a college have about 1,000 students and then your computer lab can accommodate 50, what it simply means is that you have to arrange in a manner that either they sit in pairs or they go in turns, and that can take a longer time for each and everyone to have access to this computer lab. And of course, a critical reform that also came along with this 4-year B.Ed program is the fact that we have changed the way we do our teaching practice, which formerly was the case that the students would do the teaching practice at the final year, one whole year. That's 1 year in year 3. But currently, when the student enters level 100, they are required to start doing this teaching practice, and we have to convey them in buses to the partner schools where they start to observe from year 1. That's a huge challenge to almost all the colleges in terms of transportation. The buses we have are now quite old. Basically, one Tata bus and then another Enchi bus, which is not enough to convey these students. So a very huge challenge for how we conduct our practicals. And remember, we are training teachers. That is a very critical component of what we do in the colleges of education.
There are even issues relating to, for instance, the teacher training allowances. Probably we'll talk about that a bit later on. But let me also bring in Larry AGBADOR. Larry, the question about the journey so far and how come we've not implemented the reforms till now. What's really accounting for that setback in terms of where we started and where we are now?
Okay, so I think with the reforms, they have been implemented. We are currently in the final lap of the first batch of the BS students. They are currently on campus. I think they should be completing, the first batch of the BS students should be completing their course somewhere October ending. So, and about a few months ago, we had officials from the Ghana Tertiary Education Commission who went around the 46 public colleges of education to conduct an exercise called the fidelity of implementation to access how this B.Ed program has gone on in the past 4 years. In the history of Ghana, this is the first time ever that the colleges of education are churning out teachers with a degree.
Right.
In the past, it used to be, let's say, we transitioned to a diploma, and now we are now doing degree. We have to make mention of key stakeholders like the Transforming Teacher Education and Learning, and then some agencies under the Ministry of Education, National Teaching Council, GTEC also, that's the Ghana Tertiary Education Commission, that has brought us this far with the implementation of this 4-year B.Ed curriculum. So I think for now, as a country, we are making giant steps with churning out teachers who are having not longer diploma but degree. However, there are some challenges that comes with all this. As you mentioned with Dr. ATINTONO, we have issues of infrastructure. You are training teachers who are coming out with degree, and you go to almost all the colleges of education, we have issues of most colleges not even having science labs or proper science lab facilities. And it's really a serious issue. As I said earlier, these are people who are being trained to also go out there and train our younger ones. So if they don't have practical knowledge of what they are supposed to know, then you begin to fear that when they go out there, what are they going to also train the younger ones with? So we are about to have this national conversation, God willing, tomorrow and Thursday, to discuss into details some of these challenges that we have encountered in the implementation of this 4-year BA curriculum. Despite the successes we have achieved, there are challenges that came along the way. So we are going to discuss those challenges and come up with a position paper that will present to government to consider.
So what you mean to say is already you're beginning to take some remedial measures. So you're bringing together all the principals to at least communicate one clear position to government to deal with challenges confronting the colleges of education.
Exactly. So we are not just bringing the principals together. We are bringing principals. We are bringing the various groups in the colleges of education. We are bringing the Colleges of Education Teachers Association of Ghana, CTAC, the non-teaching staff, CENTAC, the Student Leadership TAC, and CSOs in education. All stakeholders are coming together, agencies under the Ministry of Education. We are going beyond the usual rhetoric way of doing things, where we just come talk and then that's the end of it. No, this time around, whatever that we are going to discuss, at the end of it, we are presenting a position paper to government. Successive governments over the years have done their part. They've done their part in supporting the colleges. But we feel that it's time also that as stakeholders, we don't wait for government to always take decisions that in one way or the other either affect us positively or negatively. You made mention of the trainee teachers allowance.
I was just about coming to that, because that's by far the most thorny issue facing the various colleges of education. We've heard from some of the student groups who say government, for instance, hasn't paid the allowance in some months, about 7 months already. So there are varied views on whether it should be scrapped or not. Are you looking at some of these issues as well?
Yes, we are looking at varied views on some of these issues. For instance, you see, when you take the payment of the trainee teachers allowance from 2017 to 2020 alone, government spent over 432 million on the payment of trainee teachers allowance. However, when you go to these colleges, you see less of infrastructure. Now, no one will expect government to pump such huge money into the payment of allowance and still do infrastructure. These colleges are not strong enough to be on their own to put up infrastructure, just like we have in the university, where the universities can use their IGF to raise hostels and other stuff. In the colleges, the numbers will not even permit them to do that. Are you getting me? So we are now at a point where students from the various colleges come out with degree or with BS certificate, just like their colleagues in UCC, their colleagues in Winneba, who also do the same training and come out with BS. But they are not being paid allowance.
Okay, let me bring in Doc on this, because Doc, you're managing the Accra College of Education, so you have a first-hand information on how this issue of the teacher training allowances could be channeled into what some experts say is a much more judicious use. Is it the case that we should be doing away with the teacher training allowances by now, knowing that your organization, the institutions, are now awarding degrees?
I think that is the conversation we want to discuss tomorrow.
Right.
Some are of the view that originally they were diploma and therefore that support was there. Of course, we know the history of paying these allowances dates back to the 60s or even 70s, over 40 years ago. It's not a new thing. But each time there had been a rethinking it goes off and comes back until it has been restored again. So for me, sitting at where I am, yes, there are really some students who need this kind of intervention to help them.
Right.
And therefore, you would argue that it can still be maintained. But looking at it, if you have to take it away, we must also agree that then they have to be given an opportunity to have access to another source of funding, then we can help. For example, there's a student loan trust fund. Currently, the allowances is paid through that kind of a mode, but the fact is, it is just not enough. So if it has to be up, then it will require probably the students given the opportunity to access more than what is being given to them. But as I said, we will require a national conversation like the dialogue we are having tomorrow and Thursday to reach a consensus. Of course, the students themselves are also invited for us to dialogue, so it doesn't look like some people are taking it away. We would all come together to the table and take a decision that can favor all.
And just recently, CTAC, for instance, was raising concerns about how they're not placed at the same level in terms of conditions of service to that of, for instance, university lecturers in other institutions across the country. Is that also part of the challenges that you're facing as colleges of education?
Yes, it is partly part of the problem. One of the themes that we are going to discuss about the attraction of staff from the College of Education to the public universities and technical universities. Sometime last year, we noticed that across all the colleges, the teaching staff in particular, were moving towards the universities. Why? Because even though they may be senior tutors here, the salary that they get is not comparable to what's happening in the mainstream university. So you have a senior tutor in the College of Education who is leaving for the university to become assistant lecturer. And then he looks at a pay slip as assistant lecturer as an MPhil. That's the basic qualification to become assistant lecturer. And that is higher than what it takes in the College of Education. So that is part of the irony. Why don't you actually pay the person in the college the same salary? Because it's the same entry point, the same teaching that they are doing. So it is also something we have to look at. Otherwise, all of us are feeling the heat. They have left, and it's difficult to replace them because there's no financial clearance to recruit.
So as we speak now, there are more and more lecturers who are leaving the colleges of education for the universities.
Exactly, that's the situation. But I think sometime by December, if you notice, they had a strike and they were even threatening another one. I must also admit that there had been some improvement in terms of their conditions of service. For example, what we call responsibility allowance, if you occupy a certain position like a head, they were not paid anything. Last year, that's 2021, government approved of those things, and they are now enjoying that. Car maintenance allowance, some allowances in the university, they are now enjoying. The point here is they do not take up to what is being paid at the university. It's still a certain percentage, and it's a source of worry because the tertiary education landscape, and people are quick to compare. If you take their book and research allowance, they are still taking $1,000 or something thereabout.
Right.
Whereas in the mainstream university, of course, they take higher. Nobody is saying that it should be the same because definitely in the university, I came from that background myself. But we're looking at the situation where even if you are giving a percentage, it shouldn't be so much a difference that they will be leaving us, and we now need them because as a B.Ed program require people with qualifications, and we should not allow that to happen.
All right, we'll wait to see what then happens tomorrow. Larry, the final words from your end. What are we to expect then as to the call to action?
All right, so we're looking forward to hosting all stakeholders, God willing, tomorrow and Thursday at the BDACO Conference Hall at NAS headquarters for this national dialogue on initial secondary education. I think we've come a long way as a country, and with the implementation of the B.Ed program, we must be grateful to government, successive government, if I put it so, and then agencies like the Transforming Teacher Education and Learning that has brought us this far. Tomorrow, we intend to have a non-partisan discussion on these issues. We want the development, the growth of the colleges. So we are not going to have any partisan discussion, be it on any of the 7 thematic areas that we have identified to talk about at this national dialogue. We look forward to having a successful dialogue, and at the end of it all, we will present a position paper to government on the way forward for the future of the colleges. So we look forward to having a successful national dialogue tomorrow and Thursday.
Anyway, I'm grateful, gentlemen, for your time here on The Pulse. We'll be back after this break. Please stay.